Hello and welcome to Paint the Past. I'm your host Amaris. Today we're visiting my first historical love, ancient Egypt. We're looking at a scarab ring from the collection of the Royal Ontario Museum. The photos are from their online collection and I'll link to the listing below the video. Can you believe this ring is 3,000 years old? It was made in Egypt sometime between about 1550 and 1069 BCE, the period Egyptologists call the New Kingdom. That 500-year window covers some of the most famous names in all of history: Tutankhamun, Ramesses the Great, Nefertiti. And it's wild to think that the Egyptian civilization lasted so long that Cleopatra lived more than 1,000 years after this ring was made. The ring is made of gold and a carved glazed stone called steatite. Instead of a fixed stone like you would picture on a normal ring, there's a scarab beetle that can swivel on a pin that goes through the center of the beetle. You would wear it beetle side up when you wear it as jewelry, and if you need to stamp a document, the underside of the scarab has a seal carved into it. So it's a beetle and it's a seal. It's both a religious symbol and an administrative tool in one object that's small enough to lose down a drain. Let's talk about how all of that fits together. To understand why a dung beetle ended up on a golden ring worn by some of the most powerful people in the ancient world, you have to know what a dung beetle actually does. It finds a ball of animal dung, and it rolls it across the ground, sometimes for extraordinary distances, navigating by the light of the Milky Way. We know this now from scientific research. The beetles have been shown to use the galaxy as a compass. The ancient Egyptians didn't know about the navigation by starlight, but they watched the beetle roll its ball across the earth and saw something that looked to them like a mirror of something in the cosmos. The sun moves across the sky, the beetle moves its ball across the ground, and when the larvae eventually hatch from the buried ball of dung, they appear to emerge from nothing, life seemingly spontaneously from dead matter. In Egyptian theology, the sun god in his morning form was called Khepri. The name comes from the Egyptian verb meaning to come into being, to transform, to be reborn. And Khepri was depicted as a scarab beetle, understood to push the solar disk across the sky just as the beetle pushes its ball across the earth. Every sunrise was Khepri's work. Every morning was a resurrection. So when an Egyptian wore a scarab, they weren't just wearing a lucky charm. They were wearing a statement about the fundamental nature of the universe, that life renews itself, that the sun rises again, that death is not the end. Scarab amulets began appearing in Egyptian material culture around 2300 BCE, more than 4,000 years ago. By the New Kingdom, they were everywhere, worn by the living, placed on the chests of the dead, traded across the Mediterranean, exchanged as diplomatic gifts between pharaohs and foreign kings. This is really interesting for archaeologists because scarabs have been found at sites across modern-day Israel, Lebanon, Cyprus, Turkey, Sardinia, and even as far away as Spain. Every one of them is a data point on a map of ancient trade routes and cultural contact. It's a record in miniature of who was talking to whom 3,000 years ago. In 2023, a cache of scarabs was excavated at Tel Shimron in northern Israel, adding to a body of evidence for direct contact between Egypt and the Canaanite city-states of the New Kingdom period. They may be small beetles, but when they're found, they carry a lot of historical information. The scarab on the ring that I'm painting is carved from steatite, what we sometimes call soapstone. If you pick up a piece of raw steatite, you'll immediately understand why it was the go-to material for small carved objects in the ancient world. It's soft, really soft. You can scratch it with your fingernail. A craftsman with a copper or bronze tool could carve it, detail it, and drill a hole through it without any of the equipment we'd normally associate with stoneworking. In its natural state, steatite is gray and feels a little greasy to the touch. That's the soapy quality. It has a high talc content that makes it feel slippery. It's not particularly glamorous stuff. But the Egyptians had a trick. They fired it. If you heat steatite to roughly the temperature of a hot pottery kiln and add certain copper compounds to the mix, the surface transforms. It glazes. It turns a brilliant blue-green, the color we associate with Egyptian art, the color of the Nile, the color of the sky, the color that in Egyptian symbolism spoke of fertility, of life, and of all the things the scarab itself was supposed to invoke. That color has a name: Egyptian blue. It's the oldest synthetic pigment in the world, and it has a remarkable property. It fluoresces under ultraviolet light. Conservators at museums use UV lamps to scan ancient walls and objects, and Egyptian blue lights up like a beacon. That makes it possible to identify when something was painted with Egyptian blue, even under 3,000 years worth of dust and grime, or layers of other paint, or where the majority of the color has worn away. Side note for my fellow artists, the pigment code for Egyptian blue is PB31. I haven't found it available from commercial paint manufacturers, but it is available in handmade watercolors, and oh my god, I want some. Moving on. Steatite was available from Egypt's eastern desert and the Sinai Peninsula, and it could also be traded from farther afield. In the economy of New Kingdom Egypt, it was the practical, reproducible option for carved amulets and seals. Gold and lapis lazuli were for royalty. Steatite with glaze was for everyone else. And everyone else meant scribes, merchants, army officers, priests, and thousands of ordinary Egyptians who wanted a piece of that solar symbolism on their finger. The band of our ring today is gold, which in ancient Egypt was not simply a precious metal. Gold was understood to be the literal flesh of the gods. Its color was the color of the sun. And unlike silver, unlike copper, unlike almost any other metal, gold does not tarnish. It doesn't corrode. Leave it in the ground for 3,000 years and it comes out looking exactly as it went in. For a civilization that thought very seriously about what persists and what doesn't, about how you carry yourself through death and into whatever comes next, that incorruptibility wasn't a minor detail. Egypt's gold came primarily from two places: the eastern desert, which is the harsh terrain between the Nile and the Red Sea, and from Nubia, the region to Egypt's south that Egypt controlled, conquered, and drew resources from through most of the New Kingdom period. The gold mines of Nubia were so productive that Egyptian pharaohs used gold as a form of foreign policy, sending it as tribute, as gifts, as the currency of diplomacy. We know this in remarkable detail because of a discovery made in 1887 in the ruins of Akhenaten's short-lived capital city, the Amarna Archive, a collection of clay tablets bearing letters between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign rulers. In those letters, kings from Babylon, Assyria, and Mitanni write to the pharaoh asking for gold with a frankness that's almost funny across 3 millennia. One king writes that gold is as plentiful as dust in Egypt and asks for more of it. The pharaoh's reply, where it survives, is predictably less enthusiastic. The pin holding the scarab on our ring is fine gold wire, passed through a lengthwise drill hole, and stoppered at each end to allow rotation. It's simple in principle, but fiddly in practice. The scarab had to spin freely enough to be useful, but stay secure enough not to fall off. Most surviving examples manage this well, which tells you something about the accumulated skill in New Kingdom goldsmiths' workshops. If you flip the scarab over, you're looking at the seal. The carving on the seal is engraved in mirror image. Press it into soft clay, and it leaves an impression with things facing in the correct direction. In ancient Egypt, that impression was a signature, a lock, and a mark of authority all at once. If you wanted to seal a jar of wine from the royal stores, you applied a lump of clay over the stopper and pressed a seal into it. If you wanted to lock a storeroom, you applied clay over the bolt and sealed it. If you sent a letter, the sealed clay was evidence that it hadn't been opened in transit. A broken seal was a broken promise, a tampered document, or potentially even a crime. This wasn't exactly primitive technology. It was a sophisticated system of authentication running across an entire empire, and the physical evidence of it survives. Archaeologists call the hardened clay impressions bulai, and they turn up at sites across Egypt and the ancient Near East. Each one is a tiny fingerprint of an administrative moment: a jar sealed, a door locked, a letter sent. From the right cache of bulai, you can reconstruct supply chains, trace the movements of officials, and identify individuals who left no other record of their existence aside from these seal impressions. The designs on scarab seals varied widely. Many carried cartouches, the oval frame containing the name of a royal. And this is where one of the stranger puzzles of Egyptology comes in. The cartouche of Thutmose III, one of the great military pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, appears on scarabs that were manufactured centuries after his death. His name had acquired a kind of magical authority that outlasted the pharaoh himself. Wearing his cartouche wasn't a historical reference, it was more like wearing a protective inscription. The seal on the ring I'm painting today depicts a kneeling pharaoh with his hands raised towards an obelisk that represents the sun god. Below the image is a small inscription that roughly translates to Lord or Possessor of, though it's not clear who is the Lord or Possessor and of what. The loss of a seal ring was serious enough that Egyptian administrative records document cases when it happened. Several papyri from the New Kingdom record the reporting of lost seals, the ancient equivalent of canceling a lost credit card or driver's license, essentially. Ancient Egyptians didn't want their identities stolen any more than we do. Most of what we know about rings like this one come from small objects that were dug up, studied, and recorded. But a significant number entered museums and private collections in the 19th century without anyone writing down where they came from, which is a huge loss. Not just morally, though it is that, but practically. An object without context is a sentence missing most of its words. The contrast is sharpest when you look at what happens when excavation is done properly. In November 1922, Howard Carter's team broke through a sealed doorway in the Valley of the Kings and found a staircase leading down to a tomb that had been undisturbed for more than 3,000 years. This was Tutankhamun's tomb. When the jewelry from that tomb was catalogued, and there was a great deal of it, including scarab rings, pectoral jewelry, and amulets, each piece came with a record of exactly where it was found, which box, which layer, what it was laying next to. That information makes the objects incomparably more valuable as historical evidence. The British archaeologist Flinders Petrie, who excavated in Egypt from the 1880s onward, was obsessive about recording small finds in exactly this way. He also developed a method called seriation, using the changing styles of small objects like scarabs to build a relative timeline for a site, even without written dates. By arranging scarabs by the way they looked, he could put them in order. It was an early form of what we now call typological dating, and it became a foundational tool in the archaeology of the entire region. His collection, now at the Petrie Museum at University College London, is still actively studied. Modern excavations use techniques Petrie couldn't have imagined. Soil from a dig site is sieved through fine mesh to catch small objects that would once have been lost. X-ray fluorescence can identify what a glaze is made of without damaging it. Microscopic analysis of tool marks can tell you something about the workshop practices of the people who made an object. And sometimes even the sea gives things back. In the 1980s, divers off the coast of Turkey began excavating a Bronze Age shipwreck at a site called Uluburun. The ship had gone down around 1300 BCE, and its cargo was extraordinary. It included copper ingots, tin, glass, ebony, spices, and objects from Egypt, Greece, Canaan, and Cyprus, all in the same shiphold. Among the cargo was a gold scarab ring bearing the cartouche of Nefertiti. One ring, recovered from the seabed, places Egyptian luxury goods on a trading vessel in the eastern Mediterranean at a specific moment in history. That's what context does. It's interesting to consider the person who wore a ring like this. Not a pharaoh, most likely. Not someone whose name we know. Probably a mid-level official, a scribe maybe, or an army administrator. Someone who moved through the bureaucracy of New Kingdom Egypt with a seal on their finger that said, "This is who I am, these are my credentials, this document has my authority behind it." And above that seal, the scarab, capturing a culture's thoughts about the sun and what it means for the sun to rise every morning, about transformation, about the soul's capacity to come through death and be renewed, religion and paperwork, the eternal and the administrative, both on the same small ring, both equally serious, both equally real to the person who wore it. The ring is still here, and the person isn't. But in a way, the object embodies much of its former owner, their day-to-day identity, and their philosophical, mystical hope, symbolized in gold and glazed stone. It's a pretty durable legacy to have your individual identity recognized after 3,000 years. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down the Nile River of history. If you have, I'd be thrilled if you'd join me for future episodes. See you next time.